happen. I will tell you, I did a little bit of a mise en place today, which really is just French for getting myself organized. So you can't see it because a lot of it's out of frame, but let's tilt you. I've got some jars here. I've got my ingredients, my base ingredients of my oatmeal and my soy milk. And then we've got some toppings. And then my egg stuff is around the corner. So I'm going to keep you guys looking at the food. I'll just chop my head off for this one. It'll be fine. One of the nice things, oops, sorry about that loud noise. One of the nice things about these oatmeals that we're going to prep is they're super customizable. If I want to, I can literally just prep a base and then add whatever toppings I'm in the mood for later on. It's also customizable and you can decide what portion size you're going to do. So as I'm doing this, I happen to be doing a half cup of each. You could do a third cup, you could do a quarter cup. I wake up hungry, so I'm going to do a half cup of soy milk and a half cup of just regular rolled oats. Steel cut oats will not work well for this. They won't be soaked up all the way. Um, if you really needed to use instant oats, nothing bad will happen. No one's gonna die. It might be a little bit squishy and mushy, but it's okay. Um, so I could just leave it as it is. I could just leave it overnight in the fridge as is, or I can add my toppings now. So it's really up to you. Are you like mood dependent eater, or do you want to just have it ready to go and easy in the morning? For my toppings, I know already that I'm really excited to try dried blueberries. My dad randomly picked me up dried blueberries the other day. So I'm going to toss in some dried blueberries and vanilla. And if I wasn't rushing, I might add a little bit of orange zest because I really like blueberries. I'm not adding a sweetener of any kind because these blueberries are already sweetened. And I just want to taste them as is before I add something extra. Now I could totally add some salt here too if I feel like my oatmeal tastes a little better with a little bit of salt. I don't need salt in my oatmeal to be happy. Um, and I'm going to add about a quarter teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now, last time we got together, I was like, hey, measure into your hand, or, measure as you'd like for cooking, but for baking, you got to be a little more careful. This is barely baking, is how I think about oatmeal. But what I do is I get the same vanilla extract every time. I have measured about how much fits in this cap. It's about 3/4 of a teaspoon. And so I'll put in about a third of the cap so I don't have to wash one more thing. So putting that together, one of the reasons why I really love these customizable oatmeals or customizable recipes in general is because they really help with food waste. So if you were at the last presentation that we had with Anne and Alyssa from Environmental Conservation, they were talking about reducing food waste. Customizable recipes where you can just use up the stuff that you have on hand can be super helpful. Now, you'll see that I have this in a jar. It's all ready to go, really. And you'll see that I have a ton of room in here. The reason why I have so much room is I already know me and I'm going to want to heat these up. So when I heat this up, it's going to expand, it's going to bubble up and boil. And to avoid making a mess in a microwave, I want some room. If you were to want more protein in your recipe, soy milk or another, like if you were to use cow milk, I just don't because it affects my tummy. And that isn't enough for you. You could absolutely add some egg whites, replace some of the liquid with egg whites. I'd cook it, if you put in egg whites, but all right, we've got a question about how many days worth can you make in advance? Does the consistency change much over several days? I have not noticed the consistency changing much, and I have also left them in the freezer and pulled them out one by one because My schedule is a little bit variable. Sometimes there are surprises, and so sometimes it works better for me to make a big batch and leave some in the freezer. Um, if you put them in the freezer, definitely leave some room as well. And I haven't found that the consistency changes much. That said, I am personally not super sensitive to specific consistencies. So proceed with caution. If you've got a friend or, whatever, somebody that you know who has more of texture sensitivity, maybe ask them as well. Maybe there are people in the chat right now who could help with that question. Um, if I'm going to leave them in the fridge, I will do about 4 days worth. That's what's worked for me. I haven't ventured to try the fifth day and see if that's any different. But honestly, usually after the fourth day, I'm kind of ready for something else. That's just me. Okay, so that's the oatmeal. Do we have any other oatmeal questions, while we're kicking in oatmeal land? All right, Casey, who is more texture sensitive than I am, prefers 1 to 2 days without it being too mushy. Glad that you weighed in, Casey. I kind of have a tongue like a brick. And so I was definitely raised in one of those households where you finish what's on your plate. And so I kind of just eat food. Not super sensitive. All right. Coming in hot are our egg situations over here. I've got my jar, I've got some cheese. I'm gonna throw in my toppings in advance. So I'm going to add corn, beans, some shallot that's left over from last night. We had lox sandwiches for dinner. But first, I'm gonna take my eggs and I'm gonna scramble them. Now this, I'm also gonna leave plenty of room in the jar because if you choose to cook this in the jar, you're also going to want room. Now, if you have wide mouth jars, they are definitely easier to clean. So I've got two kinds of jars here. I was a fool and have all the jars, which means that I have to have all the lids. They both work, but the wide mouth jars definitely are easier to clean and get in the cracks and all of that stuff. I'm so sorry if you guys are hearing beeping. They're doing a ton of work on my road today. So fun coincidence. So the first thing I do after I get the eggs in here is I give them a little scramble with a fork. I don't personally like my eggs too homogeneous. They kind of creep me out when they look like egg beaters, but do what works for you with that category. I'm going to dump in my corn, which I already prepped here. Prepped meaning pulled out of the freezer bag. Um, Now, one of the nice things about mise en place is if you are prone to getting overwhelmed or you get interrupted a lot while you're cooking, like maybe you have small children or just chaos in your life, it could be really helpful to do the mise en place to help yourself have a little organization. If you do have to step away and come back for some reason, or people just keep asking you questions, it's just easier to stay on top of it. So I've thrown in a little bit of oregano, measured it into my hand first. I've got about quarter to half of a teaspoon here. Don't go too aggressive on oregano. That even my like a brick tongue will tell you that's not a great plan. And I'm going to chop up a little bit of cheese here. Cheddar makes everything better, so why not? Now, I haven't had issues with the cheese sticking to things. If I scramble it in like a hot pan or whatever, it hasn't been a problem for me. But you might want to make sure that your pan is really hot if you're going to cook it in a pan. And if you're going to cook it in a microwave, you are totally fine. So if I was going to cook this in a microwave, obviously that's the situation where I want plenty of room. So here's my shallot. Give it a quick choppity chop. One of the things to note about the eggs here in a jar is we're going to want the pieces pretty small. the pieces of vegetables or, herbs or whatever you're putting in pretty small, just because they are not going to get saute time before we put in the eggs, right? Like if I was doing a scramble and I was doing it all from scratch, like in the morning, I would probably saute some of these things before I actually add the eggs. But we're not doing that right now. I'm just giving these beans a little strain here. And then I'm literally just going to scoop them out with a spoon. I'm not even rinsing them. You'll notice that I did not add salt to my eggs, even though eggs do taste much better with salt. I'm not adding that because the beans have salt, the cheese has salt. I just saved myself a step by not worrying about salt and not straining the beans. If there's any reason why I shouldn't do that, let me know. But that's worked out really well as just a nice time saver. And so now, oh my goodness, I'm only at 12:02 and I have an eggy breakfast and an oatmeal breakfast. So hopefully, if you weren't talking, this would be even faster. And maybe I would get a little bit more innovative with my toppings, right? Or my add-ins. It is really nice to have beans and corn in this egg one because then I don't have to worry about, maybe we don't cut off my head anymore. Um, because then I don't have to worry about whether I have toast on hand or anything else like that. I just have everything in one jar. Um, but I've also made these with like tons of herbs or with kimchi or something else like that. And I just scramble them up, toss them in a wrap, and they're fantastic. All right, days, eggs last in jar. I would go with 3 to be safe. They probably will last quite a bit longer than that, but that is what I have done in the past. How long do you microwave the eggs in a jar? The recipe is attached. It should be at the very top of the chat. But with how long to microwave the eggs, I would start with about a minute, minute and a half, and then keep adding 30 seconds until the eggs aren't gooey anymore. You might want to give them a stir because the outside and possibly the bottom will cook a little bit faster. Um, and up, between 1.5 to 2 minutes essentially is how long it should take. Of course, different microwaves have different amounts of power and, you know, maybe the volume of egg, if you were to add another egg or many more toppings than I am adding, they might, or mix-ins, I should say, it might take a little bit longer, right? The volume's going to matter a lot in the microwave. So I would, don't do it half asleep the first time. Pay attention to it just so that you can tailor it to your microwave and the amount of volume you have. What other questions am I missing here? Casey or anybody else, do you want to chime in and tell me what questions people have right now? I must have done a good job of explaining.
Yeah, you didn't miss any questions, and I think it looks yummy.
Thanks, Casey. I hope this was useful for everybody. I mean, you could totally do a very similar thing with a chia seed pudding, as I'm doing with the oatmeal. If you just hate oatmeal, totally get that. And then I know sometimes people have a little texture sensitivity with oatmeal and they find that blending the oats instead helps. Blending the oats for me makes it worse, but we're all different. So definitely play with your food. There's, it's your food. The worst thing that's going to be out happening is you'll be out, I don't know, maybe $1 worth of oatmeal and other ingredients. So, it's a pretty low stakes playtime. Ooh, okay. Catherine suggesting flax seeds and coconut flakes with berries. I'm going to Catherine's house. Um, Phenomenal. Well, take care, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Stay cool.